for me to be here today on our 5th annual State of African Small Business Issue Forum. I'm Congressman Donald Payne Jr. From the 10th District in the state of New Jersey. And this issue has been near and dear to me most of my adult life. I come from a entrepreneur uncle who started a computer forms manufacturing business in 1969. Looking around the room, most of y'all look like you remember the big computer paper with the holes down the side. Say that to some of these folks, they're like, what? Holes? What? Well, in 1969 through 1988, we were the only African Americans in the United States of America manufacturing computer paper. And it gave me a life lesson, some good, some not so good, which leads me to continue to work in this area around wealth and entrepreneurship and black businesses growing. There were a lot of things that my uncle didn't realize and know at that time. After the company closed in '88, we learned about letters of credit and other tools that we could have used in order to continue down that road. So this is personal for me because I understand what it can mean to our community and the prosperousness and growth of it. So our topic today will be how we can increase wealth and improve our access to capital through the power of black innovation and entrepreneurship. I would like to thank Jill Johnson, CEO of the Institute of Entrepreneurial Leadership, for moderating today's discussion. Is this 5 out of 5? 4 out of 5. I just keep dragging her back in. But I'd also like to thank our panelists. Reggie Canal from Fortis Lux, Tawana Black from the Center for Economic Inclusion, Dmytro Bell from McDonald's, Stephanie Fowler from Morgan Capital Partners, Damian Hooper Campbell from eBay, and Peggy Wallace from Golden Seeds for joining us today. We're going to discuss how to use the power of black innovation and entrepreneurship to increase the wealth in our companies, communities, and culture. We know the problem is minority-owned businesses cannot get the starter and investment capital they need to grow. And we know why it exists. It's a lack of respect for black innovation, entrepreneurs, and financial services. It crushes one's self-confidence of our budding business owners and keeps them from even applying for loans at times. So now it's time to talk about solutions. Our panelists are experts in how we can open doors for entrepreneurs to access capital they need to start or grow a business, and how that growth can be the key to increase wealth in our black communities. As with any problem, there are short-term solutions and long-term solutions. Short-term solutions focus on economic mobility and involve issues that I fight for every single day. Issues like increasing the minimum wage. Studies show that poverty and welfare go down when the minimum wage goes up. Issues like fair taxation. Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act saved workers who earn $25,000 less than $40. But if you earn more than $3 million, you save $940,000. I want to repeal these taxes and all the taxes like them. So we can create a system where we all pay our fair share. As issues like spending equality in education, many of our students grow up in neighborhoods with less property tax money available for schools. Studies show that if we can close that spending gap with federal funds, our students would get an education that would be better matched for the skills of the jobs today and allow them to better manage their finances in the future. But long-term solutions depend on how we support our own. We need to push our educators and encourage our students to pursue more STEM opportunities in schools. Jobs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are in constant demand and in a much higher pay grade than other job sectors. We need to mentor and educate our future entrepreneurs on how to succeed in the marketplace. People in this room and people in your phones are some of the most successful and most accomplished African Americans in the country. This is an education you received outside of your classroom that helped you succeed. The knowledge is a resource that could help the next urban high school student become the next Oprah Winfrey or Robert Smith, a black chemical engineer who became a billionaire investment banker. Mostly, we need to invest in our own. We need to frequent minority-owned businesses. We need to promote funding opportunities for those businesses, whether it comes from the public source or such as the Minority Business Development Agency or Small Business Administration, or a private one, such as a new banking loan program to help black inventors. We need to encourage our youth to stay in school and help them stay out of prison. Then we need to save more in our own households. We need to show our children how to handle money responsibly and pass it on more generously. That way, it is our grandchildren that get the start in a better life, not just our own children. When we do those four things, promote STEM careers, encourage mentoring in our businesses in the community, educate entrepreneurs about small business funding opportunities, and save to invest in our futures, we empower our families, benefit our companies, and increase the wealth in our communities from one generation to another. But I know our panelists have much more to say on this vital issue and are much more articulate in that area. So let me again thank you for being here. And now I'll turn it over to our moderator, Jill Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Yes, afternoon. Good afternoon. How's everybody? Good afternoon. So before we get started, I just have to first and foremost thank the Congressman for this opportunity. As he mentioned, I've been here moderating this 4 out of 5 years, and the conversation has just gotten better and better. It's been elevated every year. It really has. And I remember the first year doing this, and I had a full presentation. I had my notes, every single thing that I was going to say, like mapped out and right there. And, the heels, everything. Now, I don't know if you can see, I'm ready to be comfortable. This now, through his, generous support, This feels comfortable because we've gotten to a place where we are talking and having real conversation here. So we're going to ask some questions and have conversation that you may not have heard anyplace else. You may be asked some questions and asked to raise your hand. Please raise your hand if those things apply to you, because what we're trying to do is to get a sense for where we are as a community so we can figure out how to get to where we need to go as a community. All right? So Congressman, thank you so much for continuing to have this conversation every year and be willing to put these issues, to keep these issues out in the forefront and to talk about them in a different way. As much as we love our banking folks, I don't know if you remember the first year we had a bunch of bankers who all talked about just improve your credit and get some collateral. And we have come a long way toward understanding that's just not the conversation that we should be having. So I am very excited to have the folks that we have here today with us, because I think it's something that you will hear that, again, isn't the regular conversation that we've been having. So first, I'd like to ask everyone if you could please turn off your phones, put them on vibrate, silent, or whatever, so we are not interrupted. Just a tiny bit, my background, I co-founded and run an organization, not-for-profit, called the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership. Our focus is in helping entrepreneurs who are under-resourced, not necessarily low income, but under-resourced, gain access to the knowledge networks and capital that even make success possible. Earlier this year, we launched an initiative called Women of Color Connecting to specifically focus on women of color entrepreneurs who have the potential to be on the growth scale exit trajectory. And last year, we talked a lot about business exit. How many of you all in this room are entrepreneurs? Okay, so a good number of you. How many of you have thought about how you're going to exit your business and create liquidity for yourselves? Okay, that's encouraging. Hopefully, maybe some of you were in the conversation last year and thought about that more. How many of you all are angel investors? Okay, okay. We have one there. How many of you all are familiar with angel investing and know what that is? Okay, a few folks. Has anyone ever invited you to join an angel group? How many people have been invited to join an angel group? Okay, good. Okay, good. So we have a good sense of who's here. How many of you all with your businesses feel like you need capital to grow and expand? All right, a good number. So this conversation that we're going to have today is really about not just access to capital, but sort of the origin of access to capital around friends and family money, angel investing money, but also alternative strategies. What are the other things that we should be doing to create multiple income streams for ourselves? And so we're taking the conversation, people generally talk about financial literacy. Well, instead of just talking about you need to open a checking account, you need to get your credit right, we're going to elevate that conversation. This is financial literacy 3.0 right here, all right? So without further ado, let's get started. And I would like for each of our panelists to give your introduction, 3 minutes. We'll just go right down the line, and then we will get into our conversation. So Reggie, why don't we start with you?
Good afternoon. My name is Reggie Canal. I'm a financial advisor at a firm called Fortis Lux Financial. Fortis Lux is a boutique comprehensive wealth management firm, and what we do is help clients, individuals create wealth, generational wealth, right? I'm originally from Haiti, so I have a typical immigration story, raised by a single mother, and we were taught education, right? So no one taught me about business or money. It was just go to school, right? Got into banking, and then I get to college, and my roommate Dave was my first Jewish friend. And Dave had a guy in his life, and I couldn't understand, why was he always on the phone? Dave had a stockbroker. 18 years old? Who has a stockbroker at 18 years old, right? So I was calling home, saving money, I buy sneakers for my birthday money. David's grandparents were giving him stocks, right? So Dave and I are still very good friends. Dave became an investment banker. Dave has a beautiful home in Connecticut. Dave just bought a big house in Wyoming, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and he's having a big 40th birthday. He said, I want you and your family to join us next year. So Dave has gotten a long way. So getting into banking, I've learned a lot about wealth creation. The first part of my career, I worked in a private bank, and most of my clients made money through real estate or sold a business, right? So to me, I want to talk to you about tactical ways to create wealth. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Tawana Black, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Economic Inclusion based in St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I have spent my career in each sector working to be able to build inclusive economies, build the capacity of leaders in all sectors to be able to really disrupt their communities. And at the Center for Economic Inclusion, a couple of years ago, we recognized that the Minneapolis-St. Paul economy was not growing fast enough, and not only that, it was not growing with the assets of people of color, and in fact, was leaving us behind and leaving us out. And if we didn't do something to drastically disrupt the way that the private sector and the public sector went about their business, we would see that economy tank and see communities of color left behind. So the organization today works to equip private sector leaders, particularly in large companies where we have a concentration of Fortune 500s in our market, and public sector policymakers and institutional leaders to examine closely the practices, policies, and behaviors that they have that are holding back our economy and holding back communities of color, to dismantle those policies and practices and institute new ones, to measure how that's impacting our economy. And you'll hear me say that over and over again, because for too long, we've approached these issues, the issues of building wealth, the issues of entrepreneurship, the issues of employment and inequities through the lens that's viewed ultimately as charity when our regions and cities don't thrive, when our states and ultimately our country don't thrive. It's netted back down to being charity. So we take the lens of saying that this is about our economy. Every regional economy in the country is hurting today, save a couple, because we have continued to leave folks that look like us behind. Intentionally, very often, and sometimes unintentionally, but there are things we can do with great intention in the private and public sectors that can turn that around, and our job in our organization is to help businesses do that.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dmytro Bell, and I'm a local McDonald's owner-operator here in the Baltimore, Washington metropolitan area. I myself own 5 McDonald's restaurants, and my family, they actually own, collectively, we have 19 currently today. Thank you. So my viewpoint sitting on the panel today is a little bit different because it's a perspective of as a recipient of generational wealth. And while I sit here today and I proudly say, you know, I'm a next generation McDonald's owner-operator, which means my parents are in the business before, years ago, I would have never said that. I wouldn't have been proud to say that. And I really would have been really a little embarrassed by the fact that it gave me the feeling almost that I inherited something, or it took away from my own academic and business accomplishments. I felt a little bit less than to be able to be a next generation owner operator, instead of embracing the fact of being able to be a recipient of generational wealth, being able to accept the responsibility that comes with generational wealth. When you actually follow businesses that are passed down, you actually see such a dramatic decline in the wealth being lost through the second generation, and the third generation is a staggering 13% of businesses that are gone by the wealth gone by the third generation. So for me, as a part of maturity and also aligning myself with persons and having a good team, I was able to mature and also understand and capitalize on the gifts that our family had been blessed with. And I think that as a family unit and a business unit, we've been able to kind of come up with a structure that has worked successfully. And now I'm able to embrace the generational wealth received, and also able to help my family legacy move forward, push forward, and hopefully influence others to do the same.
Good evening, good afternoon rather. My name is Stephanie Fowler, and I am founder and managing partner of Morgan Capital Partners. It is a boutique investment entity that's designed to invest in multifamily and residential housing throughout the United States. We had roughly ownership interest in about 300 residential units, which we subsequently sold last year, and we are developing a strategy for single-family investments over the coming 12 to 18 months. And I have a very interesting perspective on this because I left a corporate experience for about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I had been working for a large Japanese financial institution. I'd worked there for almost 25 years, and I accumulated the wealth that I'm using for investment while working. So I am one of the people who chose the route of saving very aggressively in order to invest and using those investments in order to achieve personal liberation. And as a teaser, I'll leave behind that I'm the granddaughter of a sharecropper, and I think I had a very interesting journey that a lot of people might find instructive in terms of how we can use our own, everything that we have access to today in order to build personal wealth without necessarily doing things that are outlandish or extravagant or unheard of. Thanks.
Hello, family. Damian Hooper Campbell. I am eBay's first Chief Diversity Officer. I've been in the role for a little bit over 3 years. I hail from Harlem, grew up Jersey and Connecticut, and have been in Cali for about 5 years. So I'm out in Silicon Valley. And if you've never visited or walked through the hallways of a place like Google or eBay, I encourage you to. It is a different way of living. This is dressed up for me right now with a t-shirt and a jacket. If I wear this, people start thinking I'm interviewing somewhere. So the question becomes, what does a Chief Diversity Officer do? And I will tell you this in the context of wealth creation because they are not separate. My job is either to own or to influence how we hire people. So whether or not we go to HBCUs or to women's colleges when we recruit, or do we just continue to go to predominantly white institutions? It's also to make sure that the process is fair when people actually come in and interview. But then when people actually get to the company, if it sucks to work at eBay, there's no point in us doing all this work to try to see a more diverse set of individuals inside of the company. And so my job is also to make sure that it's inclusive inside of the company. And then finally, and this is where we try to differentiate, being the founder of e-commerce in this world, we try to differentiate in that my job is about trying to see a more diverse set of buyers and sellers on our platform. eBay is a wonderful opportunity for economic empowerment for businesses or for individuals. And so why is that related to wealth creation? Well, one, the equity that individuals can get inside of these companies when you work there is game-changing. Two, we have to make sure that black folks and other folks are getting compensated correctly when they get promoted. And three, you as a business owner get access to 182 million buyers across the world. And what we know from research is our community does not leverage the internet and e-commerce at the same levels as others do when it comes to small businesses. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. Thank you for having me.
It's a very interesting perspective. My name is Peggy Wallace, and I had a Wall Street career. And 15 years ago, I met the woman who founded Golden Seeds and attended the first meeting, which consisted of 3 of us meeting an entrepreneur. And essentially, in the mid-90s, long story short, my generation, we were the first generation of women who slammed into the glass ceiling and made that first attack to try to have very successful careers. And I could say that we are all very disappointed by what we achieved in terms of our participation in the C-suite and on boards and in business in general. And we love business. And our conclusion was that the only way to change these companies, because the woman that founded Golden Seeds was the first member of the diversity committee at JP Morgan, and she knew we were never going to change these big corporations. And so we vaguely thought, well, women need to own companies. It was just an idea. Well, the only way to change is from the top down. We need to own companies. And we had no idea how to own companies. So what we discovered was something called the angel market. first we discovered the venture capital market, but even more importantly, we then discovered the angel market, which are the engines of startup capital in America and how companies, all of the great companies that we know of today, ultimately come to be. And we discovered that there were no women in these markets as investors or recipients of capital. So 15 years ago, women were getting maybe 3% of angel capital and probably 1% or 0% really of venture. And they were getting, and there were no women in the venture fund market as partners and virtually no women angels. So our organization formed itself as an angel group, and 15 years later, we're one of the largest angel groups in America. We've invested almost $120 million into about 150 women-led companies. We require that every single company that we invest in have one woman in the C-suite. I would argue that every company raising capital should be eligible. How can you not have one woman in the C-suite? But last year, 86% of venture capital went to all male teams. 2.2% of venture capital went to all female teams. The numbers for minorities would be less than 0.5%. So we are completely outside of these stock markets as women and as minorities. Our group has really woken up in the last few years, and I am so happy that I've met Jill and Stephanie, because we realized that we were not as diverse as we would like to be. We've been very focused on it from the gender lens, and we were aware that the numbers that we've experienced as women are horrific, but they're even more horrific for people of color. We as an organization want to be much more intentional about inclusion, and we're very excited to be working with all of you to bring our processes, education, and systems for funding each other. And the more we activate this, we can change everything.
Thank you. Didn't I tell you we're going to be talking about some different stuff this year? So I want to start with Tawana and research, because so much of the issues are around first knowing what the issues are and documenting and having the research to prove some of these things that we're saying, because we all know intuitively that there are all these problems, but it's when the research comes out, namely usually done by like these big companies, that really says, oh, we actually have a problem. What you all haven't been just thinking this up in your minds. There really is a problem that exists. So Tawana, if you can set the stage for us with some of the research that you have at your disposal.
Absolutely. So I appreciate the context setting that you gave there, because it is important. The market is fueled by data-informed, market-responsive decisions, and often those decisions don't also center us. Don't center us as assets, and don't center our knowledge and the data that exists about us. But that is starting to change, but it behooves us to also know that data. So a few facts for us to consider here, given all that you've heard here, and you've heard a few of these facts kind of referenced here today. First, as we think about wealth and inheritance, what is fueling the ability for Black businesses to be able to thrive? It takes wealth to do that. Only 8% of Black families in America can expect to be in receipt of an inheritance. 8% compared with 26%. The inheritances that we're receiving then also have a gap in that Black families who are receiving an inheritance, the range tends to be at an average of $86,000 compared to $236,000 in inheritance that whites are receiving. $86,000 compared with $236,000. Let's talk about debt. Overall, Black families are 1.3 times more likely than white families to have student debt, one of the most overwhelming forms of debt today, and 73% more likely than white consumers not to have a credit score. This impacts us not just in terms of the debt that we have, but our ability to then go after debt in a meaningful way in growing our businesses. And then how many of us are there? 2.58 million Black-owned businesses. And those businesses are performing. By and large, studies show that Black-owned businesses and other businesses owned by people of color and indigenous people are outperforming our peers. I want to lean in to say that again. We are outperforming our peers when it comes to investments that are made. Our sales growth may not always show those trends, but when it comes to investments, and my colleague on the far right has data that she can share with you as well about equity investments that are going into our businesses, we perform. If it's debt that is going into our businesses, that debt is being paid back and used to be able to create additional jobs that are fueling not just our communities, but fueling our economies. And that is a case that we need to make as we go to advocate for stronger policies. According to a McKinsey study that was released just this spring and summer, if a black wealth continues to grow faster than white wealth, and you heard that right, today black wealth is growing faster than white wealth, 3% compared to 1.8%, the wealth gap will narrow from 10 times to 7.7 times, adding $1 trillion to our American economy by 2028. However, indeed. However, if we don't have deep interventions, because that doesn't just happen on its own, if we don't have deep interventions, that current gap of 10 times widens based on the highest rates of growth for whites and the highest rates of decline for blacks to 22.7 times. A wealth gap of 22.7 times. While the media focuses a lot on our education levels, on our employment levels, on our housing disparities, and our health disparities, that wealth gap is what we really must be focused on. The U.S. economy, if that happens, will lose $1.5 trillion, or 6% of GDP, by 2028. That's how much we count. That, my friends, is the business case. That is the business case for investments in black-owned business. That is the business case for us spending our dollars in black-owned businesses. AEO tells us that there are 3 gaps that are impacting us and black-owned businesses today. The credit gap, for certain, the wealth gap, absolutely, and the trust gap. And our organization would echo, using all of this data and many more data points that you are certainly familiar with and have heard about this entire week, to say that we must address each one of those gaps to ensure that wealth grows through investments in black-owned businesses, and that those investments continue to pour back into black-owned businesses as one of the best strategies to grow our communities and to grow the American economy.
So I want to push back on something, or I guess highlight something that you said and get your thoughts on this. Is making a business case enough? Or does racism run so deep that people are willing to leave money on the table because, and to turn a blind eye, again, to not focus on the green that we can all achieve together when everyone wins, but letting, again, this racism be the force that drives either action and intentionality or lack thereof.
So I want to drill into the words you use, because I think words are used intentionally and we have to focus on those. Racism is absolutely at play here, has been and will continue to be. However, we've used that word business case to mean a lot of things and very loosely, and rarely tied it back to the bottom line that is helping or hurting everyone. We've got to get much more adept at being able to draw that case and being able to point very specifically to where racism is at play. So for instance, in our region, we produced a document, and I've got copies of this because we're helping some cities across the country be able to do the same thing, on the indicators for an inclusive regional economy. They were able to show that in our market, redlining is still very much present and active. Having a meeting with business leaders to call that out and be able to show the data that doesn't just talk about low-income rental affordability, but says, wait a minute, when we look at middle-income households in our market and disaggregate the data by race, we see that blacks are still being denied home mortgages when credit is not an issue and when income is not an issue. Then we can point to that, knowing that home ownership is the biggest means to date, right now, for generating wealth, and point that out to be able to call out racism and tie racism back to GDP or gross regional product in a particular region. Being able to use the data to drive a case of market responsive action that also addresses racism and grows wealth is key for us to take on both at the same time.
Yeah, and something that I want to get to as well is that creating an opportunity for people to have access or take the same, to have access to a path, doesn't mean that they will be able to take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
Due to the systemic issues and challenges. And that's where it seems, and I'd like to comment because I know you guys also do some work around supplier diversity. And then maybe we can get some other comments on this too. But in a lot of the supplier diversity space, it's, oh, we open the door, we invited some people in, we can't find any, they can't fulfill on the contracts. How do you marry those issues?
Yeah, I think the need to move beyond that case for having the door open. Is the door open? We're welcoming, and I appreciate my colleague at eBay, who is a diversity officer. I formerly walked in similar shoes, and helping business leaders understand the difference between simply saying, we're welcome, anybody can come in, the door is open, to no, we're going to intentionally create opportunities. And if we look at how white wealth was built, we will start to find the solutions to building wealth in Black communities. If we go back and study, and this was recently done, a study by 3 universities, Princeton and UC Davis and a university in Denmark, to study how white wealth was built. We think that whites lost wealth after slavery ended, but actually what they found was that white slave owners recovered all of the wealth they lost in less than 20 years, and then some. Recovered that through intentional actions of our government, through intentional community building of communities coming together, and our government can take intentional actions to bring Black wealth back. In the places where our farmers and sharecroppers have lost their wealth, we can take intentional actions to bring that back in the same way that we've proven we can do it time and time again in white communities. And we have to be collectively using that data, using that knowledge to call it out, and then to put policy actions for both the private and public sectors on the table and not stop until they're in place.
Thank you. So, Reggie, you talked about your roommate and having a stockbroker. Tell us some of the other things that you have seen in that world, in your world, that people are doing that maybe we just don't know about here.
Sure. A couple of things, and I think a lot of you raise your hands that you're business owners, which is great, right? So I get a couple of different calls. First of all, I want to just comment really quickly. I also was the first Chief Diversity Officer at HSBC. So I've been a banker for like 20 years, and I was doing trade finance, and they've asked me to take the diversity role. So I went home and told my wife, they want me to be the head of diversity. And she said to me, why did they take the minority to disrupt them off their career path to do diversity? So I had to go back and prove to the COO why this was the best career move for me. It was the best career move of my life. Because why? They said, if you do that job for 2 years, you can have any job that you wanted, right? When I looked around the organization, I realized that we had no Black private bankers, we had no Black investment bankers, right? So all our folks in those fields were in operations. But I also looked at, we were doing a lousy job of attracting high net worth Black professionals to the bank. Because I had such a great relationship with all the heads of the businesses, after 2 years, I said, I want to be a private banker. They said, well, you have no license, you have no book of business, but they said, we will give it to you. They allowed me 2 hours every morning to study for my license, and they said, you want this segment so bad? Yeah, you start from scratch. So I started courting high net worth Blacks who were in branches, who were selling businesses at $2 million. No one knew their names. They would stand in lines. And I thought, you have to be recognized. You have to know who you are, and then people can advocate for you. So that job is very powerful if you use it for the right way. And then from there, we started a segment targeting high net worth minorities, and the rest was there. So kudos to you, what you're doing. But what I learned working in a private bank was strategies folks made money. I talked about real estate, and I talked about buying and selling a business. I also never understood the power of insurance. Insurance is one of the biggest ways of creating wealth and generational wealth, right? Most times, folks who don't really understand, if you have a family, if you have a discussion about insurance in your family, people say, "What, are you trying to kill me?" And that's usually the typical response. But do you know the #1 asset to protect is your ability to make money, right? So most folks, especially if you're an entrepreneur, the concept of disability, if you get hurt, you're doomed, right? If you work at a company, most companies will give you 60% of your salary, right? There's usually a 40% gap. Most people can't survive on their salaries, let alone 60% of their salary, right? So I think if I leave you with anything else, I think we as a people need to understand insurance, right? Most other folks have used insurance to create wealth, right? When someone dies, This person is accumulating or getting a beneficiary of these assets or tax deferred. Then there's educating them because the beneficiary may blow the money, but creating wealth immediately. Insurance is the #1 thing I want to leave you, that we can create wealth pretty quickly to sort of really move the needle for folks now. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's really taking a long-term view, because for some of us it might not be that we get wealthy in our lifetime, but if we take the view that we can create a path to wealth for either our children or grandchildren, there's no reason that 2 decades from now, this room isn't full with all people who are raising their hands saying, I'm an angel investor, and everyone's talking about the businesses in which they're investing. And, it's a whole different story. But it means we have to do something a little differently.
Can I just, a couple of things. I just want to get a couple of things off my chest. Okay, for you that are entrepreneurs, right, we normally say, and we have a client that went on Shark Tank, and there was a big discussion. She's African-American. She launched a applesauce brand, and she got to deal with Mark Cuban. And the discussion was, she's a highly compensated individual, and they said to her, you're not an entrepreneur, because she had a head of an HR job at a large fashion firm, all right? And then she started crying. She's such strong, she answered every question, she knew her numbers. She started crying because she said to them, do you know how many people rely on my income? For you to say I'm not an entrepreneur because I'm not all in, then it became, this thing went viral, because then she said, after that, they were like, you are a true entrepreneur, etc. You as the owner of the business, if you personally don't have your act together, there's an issue, right? Because we tell you go all in, put all your money in, and most folks, what do? They leave a big corporate job, and I'm glad, Stephanie, you didn't do that. When they need the capital, they go into their 401k, right? Because you want to prove your model, you don't have access to friends and family money, you take your 401k, you put it in your business, God forbid the business tanks, you're now personally doomed, right? You got tax situations, etc. So for us, when we meet entrepreneurs and they're in jobs, we pull them off the ledge and say, listen, do you have 2 years worth of money to live on before this business generates money, right? Because if not, you're squeezing to force revenue when you don't have it, right? So we say, okay, let's get 2 years of money saved up and let's start the business, right? The other thing is, you need personally your foundation in order, because you also are the business. So when you come in for financing, they're looking at you personally because you are the business. So if I could leave you with the other thing for you entrepreneurs, get your personal house in order before you start seeking business financing, because they're always looking at your personal finances. And if the business fails, at least you can always go back to a job. But if you've messed up your credit, your 401k is gone, your family's doomed.
So I'm going to get Stephanie involved in this conversation, because I think, again, your path is an interesting one, a one that was very, very intentional. And full disclosure, Stephanie and I were roommates in college. So I know her history well, and I watched her be super intentional. Even when we were trying to figure out a place to live in New York, we were going to live together, she said, well, I need to live 5 blocks from where my job is going to be so I can walk, so I don't have to pay for the subway, and so I can save money. I'm not even joking. And I was like, so I have to be constrained to this because you want to save money. But you know what? It worked for her. And so please share with us your amazing journey.
Thanks. Actually, a lot of your comments really resonate with me, Reggie, because I always, when I went into the corporate environment, I was very lucky that when I graduated from university, I was working in finance and I was making more as a 22-year-old, or about the same amount as my parents were making, and they had been working for an entire lifetime. And that to me was the power of education, and really leveraging the lessons that my parents had shared with me. My mother, as I mentioned, was the daughter of a sharecropper, and my father was an immigrant who I think maybe had graduated, left with sixth grade. He'd had a 6th grade education, and they both emphasized education. That education allowed me to secure a job that paid me very handsomely. And I always felt that I was, I don't know if anyone's a James Brown fan, but Ain't No Love in a White Man's Skyscraper sort of comes to mind. And I was very fortunate in the position that I had. The people were very supportive. I stayed there for 25 years. But I always felt as though I was passing through because I very highly prized my freedom, and I wanted to be in a position where I could make the decisions that were right for me. And I always had a desire to be an entrepreneur, and I completely agree with Reggie's comments regarding setting your own house in order. So when I began working, I immediately signed up for a 401k. After that, I was very intentional about how I spent my money. I chose one expense that I was really passionate for me, which was travel. And then I was frugal with everything else. I took my lunch. I walked when I could. I took the train. Even to this day, I don't own a car. But to me, those were material sacrifices that I was willing to make so that one day would come when I felt if I wanted to walk away, I could. And that day came in the form of my son, who is now 16 years old. And when he was 11, I resigned from my job, and I began my real estate investment company with largely the proceeds that I had saved over the course of working. And I say that story because I share that story because I want to encourage people to look at what they can do where they are. I think oftentimes when we talk about building wealth, we want to concentrate on, I'm going to create this really great business and I'm going to do these wonderful things, but it may take time. And there are things that we can do constructively here and now that can make a tremendous difference in our wealth as well as in the wealth of our descendants. Having insurance that's 5 to 10 times what your personal current income is can be a tremendous way to create wealth for the following generations. And then forming partnerships or relationships with other people in order to invest in assets that can actually grow over time, I think are a couple of ways to start to work from where you are.
Thank you. Question, how many people in here have a wealth advisor, money management, someone who is a professional at building and growing wealth? Okay, a few. So that's a good thing. Next year we'd like to see all those hands go up, all of them. So Denisha, I'd like to get to you because I find it very interesting. My parents had a business, as the congressman said, his family had a business, and in fact our families, kind of knew each other back in the day and were kind of part of that together. I think it's really interesting where other communities revel in being, a Hilton or a Kardashian or, whatever, and they leverage that. A Rockefeller. You don't find anyone shying away from that. And here you are, have these accomplished parents who have, done what they had to do to get to where they were, and you were feeling some kind of way about that. Like, I'm my own person. Talk about that experience and what it took you to overcome that, but how their foundation gave you another level of understanding that will allow you to take things to the next level.
Okay, so interesting question. I think that in our community sometimes there's a need that you almost have to have a bootstrap story. And so I had to, come to grips and understand that you don't have to have a bootstrap story in order to be successful. And so I think that for me, the journey with that was aligning myself with persons that were successful. The person who I had a conversation with that kind of gave the first enlightenment really was a wealth asset manager. That was actually who I'd aligned myself with to be my mentor, that could spearhead myself in the right direction. Even in the McDonald's industry, my mentor was a Caucasian gentleman, Jerry Gimmelstop, who's since passed. But I think it's also important as well, even with that, to make sure that you have a diverse group of people that you can trust, personally and professionally. And you can learn so much from the mistakes and things that they were, that they've actually seen or experienced or advised upon. And for our family in general, even though we're in a franchise model, it was very important that we actually kind of brought teeth in the game, if you will. So I worked in the pharmaceutical industry when I graduated Penn State University. actually for 7 years. And so part of what I was able to bring to the table with my family was my 401k monies, and also monies that I had realized through real estate acquisition, as opposed to, you know, maybe having to go out and get a shiny car and things like that. And I think for us, it's important. Our family believes in living wills, like, you know, I want to give you what I can now while I'm living, so I can see you and advise you. And so we have a system of, actually, they matched what I was able to bring in. And so, for example, for me, my businesses are outright. They're 100% in my own name, but the first one started with the money that I had accumulated and the understanding. I had to demonstrate to them that I had the maturity and that I had the business acumen to be able to come into the business and make an impact and difference. And so at the time, I had actually gained my Six Sigma Process Excellence DMYtro certification from Johnson & Johnson. And basically what that deals with is project management and being able to find an issue or an area or gap of opportunity and fixing that within a certain standard deviation from where it needed to be. So I was able to use the skills that I had, bring it into my family, and we were able to again grow the business or grow our efficiencies and things like that. And I think it's really important when you do come into a family business to be able to align your strengths and everybody have a niche where they're able to actually like make a direct impact and make a difference. And so that's what has, you know, worked well for us.
So, you know, something that I think is so interesting, you mentioned this Bootstrap story, and we were talking about this on the train, that sometimes those of us who have had a little bit of a leg up, or you've gotten some education or something, you almost feel ashamed of that, or not willing to be out front and center with it. And you know, you see even a lot of the programs, and why I make the distinction when I talked about the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership and who we serve, that a lot of the programs are for people who are low income. You have to have like no money. And so if you've gotten a little bit of something, there's very little support. It's kind of like, oh, you made it, you'll be okay, you'll be fine. When really, you've just crossed over. You're just barely over that edge, oftentimes.
I think a lot of that is just in our community. You know, everything is started from the bottom, now I'm here. Or you came up the hard way. And everyone, you know, we glamorize a lot, like having to have hardship. And I think it's okay, like, not to have hardship. And I think we have to be okay with that and celebrate successes that don't always start from that, and it's still okay.
Well, and the reason I bring it up is because there does still seem to be an institutional bias against people who don't have that bootstrap hardship story. So again, a lot of the programs are, if you have zero money, when you look at even a lot of programs for businesses and CRA, it's low-income census tract, you know, where the programs are often attracted. And so we have a tough time as a not-for-profit because everyone wants to fund and support people who, you know, are going from poverty and welfare, et cetera. But when I talk about creating wealth in businesses, like, oh, well, why do we need to fund and support creating wealth in businesses? They're businesses, it's for profit. And when you hear social impact investors, a lot of the social impact investing goes to, again, you know, poor, they'll fund the white guy who's opening a factory to create a couple of jobs that may or may not even come to fruition for people in low-income communities, right? But the profits are still not going to a person of color or person in the community. So I think that bootstrap point that you bring up is a really, really interesting one, and something that Tawana, even as part of the research, you know, maybe we need to be addressing even more.
If I can just add one thing, just what you said about the hardship. We've all read the studies about, you know, if you weren't born into money and you had that grit and you've made it, you arrive, and then those of us who have kids and all of a sudden your kids are kids of privilege and you're like, oh, my kids are not harding up. I don't know if it's you've received, you didn't work as hard as your parents, but I think there is a balance of, you know, I have friends who are doing really well and their kids don't get everything. So I just think it's a mindset of like, how do you get people to, you know, look, my parents would say, oh, I walked from here to here. You don't expect you to walk 50 miles, right? You have sneakers. But there is how do you educate folks who are now getting and inheriting these things now to say, okay, how do you make them, one, they deserve it, they're not going to waste it, but at the same time, look, to your point is, why did she have to suffer if her parents had X number of McDonald's, right? So that, I think there's a balance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remind my children it's our money. We're allowing you to use some of it. But as soon as you reach a certain age, you gotta make your own. And then, we'll think about how we may give some over. I want to go to Damien. And then actually I wanna, Denisha, I'm gonna come back to you just about kind of the whole franchise model, because I think that a lot of times when we think of entrepreneurship, it's I have to start a business from the ground up and from the very, very beginning. But what are the models that we can use when we're leveraging an infrastructure that already exists? I'm going to come back to you in a minute. Damien, I'd like for you to talk about that and some of the innovative programs that you're implementing at eBay to help people leverage this tremendous e-commerce platform.
Sure. And really quickly, as we're talking about this, sorry, thank you. It dawns on me, like somebody said it earlier, that the structural things, we should be talking beyond just the door being kicked open. It's about kind of what now. And I think the thing that oftentimes gets ignored, especially in our community, is for so long, and we still have clearly quite a ways to go, but for so long, a lot of those systemic, institutionalized things were in place. As we are starting to see maybe some progress, there's a behavior and a mindset that's on the other side of that, right? So the structural piece is just that. It's the structure, but oftentimes we ignore the cultural piece. We ignore the fact that many of the musicians that are influencing our children right now are speaking to them about consumerism versus necessarily ownership. And I think as we fight for structural change, which I think is great, sister, you just educated me like on everything, so thank you. We also have to pay attention to the cultural piece and what can we role model to our young people and even to each other about what this stuff actually means. And I think that that's oftentimes ignored. Along those lines, at eBay, since we started, it's been about economic empowerment. It's been about, before we were more about find the used stuff that's around your household and sell it. And it was an auction and you had to bid on it. Now 80% of the stuff that we sell is brand new. And only 15% of the stuff that we sell is auction. The rest of it is fixed price. And so with that though, honestly, we don't usually collect demographic data from our sellers. But you can go to one of our annual seller meetups with 2,000 sellers and simply look around the room and see that we're not there. We are not there. And so I love that everybody's been using this word intentional, because when I started, and Reggie, I can't agree with you more that this role can be a token role. It can also be a very powerful role. And I decided that heck no, it wasn't going to be a token role. And one of the ways that happened was I said, we're not just going to talk about recruiting. We're also going to talk about the business. Most people think if you have a diverse workforce and then you create a really good workplace, then voila, things will happen in the business. But no, you have to be intentional every way through. So there was a white man from the South who was heading up our America's Marketplace business. And my second month in, I sat with him and I said, hey, Hal, tell me who our sellers are. And we mapped it out, and it basically came out that the majority of our sellers were middle to older age white men. And we talked about some interventions in there. And he said, well, what's stopping us from doing this? And I loved that he asked that question. I said, nothing. All you got to do is create the roles. And so we were intentional about creating roles in the business that are focused on diversity and inclusion and going out to find sellers. So for instance, this pin that I have on right here is a Black Panther pin. And there's a sister named Dorian Fletcher who created all of the jewelry for the Black Panther movie. We found out about her and went to her and said, sis, you're doing well, but there are 182 million people across the globe that want to hear from you, and onboarded her onto our platform. So that's one of the things that we've done to be very intentional, is to create roles in the business that are responsible for that look at metrics, that get out to our churches in particular and talk to people in the churches about how they can use eBay. The other thing that we saw was that there are cities all across the world, really, because it started in Germany, but we've become more focused in the United States recently. Cities all across the world that have gone through and are going through economic hardship. And so we looked at Akron, where much of that economy was built on, factories. And those factories went away, like so many, of our cities. And we said, well, there's a density of small businesses that are there. Akron is 30% or so black. How can we go in and lift up an entire population of small businesses? And so we created a program called Retail Revival a couple of years ago, where eBay goes into cities where the governments actually want to work with us. We don't charge anything, we don't ask for anything except access to small business owners who are not using the eBay platform. And we provide them with services that would usually cost for free. We provide them with analytics and data around what's selling. I met a sister, we just launched in Baton Rouge recently, and I met a sister who has amazing art. And when I told her that there are pieces of art selling on eBay for $1 million, she was blown away and didn't even know that you could sell art on eBay. I met a young brother who has a physical disability, 12 years old, and his parents have invested in him and created Leroy's Lip Smacking Lemonade. I think it got the #1 lemonade award in Louisiana. I didn't even know there were lemonade awards. And this brother got it, and they didn't realize that they could sell on eBay. And so the program is set up to educate people, to give people services, to give people analytics, to help them even figure out how to market products, and then to get them international. And the last thing I'll say is, and I'm sure, sis, you probably have some stats on this, but international is major. And one of the best outcomes that we're seeing from this program, so we've launched in Akron, Ohio, in Lansing, we've launched in Greensboro, we've also launched, as I said, in Baton Rouge, and will continue to launch. But one of the best outcomes I've seen are people getting their listings, no matter what they are, to markets outside of the United States and figuring out that global aspect of it. So we are not perfect in all this. We haven't solved all of this, but this is the work that we are being intentional about within our marketplace.
Can you come to Orange, New Jersey?
I grew up in Montclair, brother, so, yes.
Denisha, talk to us a little bit again about the franchise model, and why for you, you feel like it's a great platform.
So with regards to the franchise model, I think the benefits of a franchise model is obviously you get to capitalize on an established brand. So there's a little bit less risk associated, especially if it's a larger brand, i.e. McDonald's. In addition to that, you do have structure, you do have like a wealth of knowledge, you do have resources. I guess the biggest difference would be, we don't have the autonomy to add items to the menu. You don't have flexibility of that sort. There's certain things that you do as a system. And as far as like from an application process or the guidelines for McDonald's franchise in particular is, I guess with any franchise, would be a personal financial statement. There's not necessarily a credit score. Credit worthiness is, considered. With McDonald's, you aren't allowed to have any felonies or things of that nature. They do want to see proven business experience, et cetera. So I think there are pros and cons to a franchise model. What's really different more so about McDonald's versus like say a Chick-fil-A or a Pizza Hut or something like that is a lot of McDonald's does allow you the ability to actually grow wealth in your business. So grow equity per se. And so whereas you see that is different, like for example, like with a Chick-fil-A. So if, let's say for example, if you buy a McDonald's, let's say the average now is $2.5 million. And you're able to grow your business and grow sales, et cetera, and let's just say you're now at $3 million. When you sell your restaurant, you can actually sell it for the equity in that, and usually we sell at a cash flow multiple. The cash flow multiples are a little higher or lower depending on where you are. Florida's higher for obvious reasons. But based on how you're running your business is obviously what has direct impact on that cash flow. And so, like for example, within McDonald's, like an average cash flow multiple right now, let's just say is around 5. So if you are making $300,000. If your restaurant is cash flowing, and I think the average right now is about let's just say 300,000 for rounded numbers, you would sell your restaurant at a cash flow multiple of 5, which would be you would sell that restaurant for 1.5 million. So McDonald's does allow you more, in our franchise model, it does allow you more of the financial benefits that you would see with regular, true, like organic business ownership, which is a little bit different. Like, so for example, with like Chick-fil-A, I'm just using that because it's a comparable size model. Like with Chick-fil-A, when your franchise term is over, when you decide that you want to close the doors, there isn't like really passing on to the next generation. You're pretty much done at that point. There's not equity stake in the business. So again, with the franchise, outside of the financial implications, there's certain things that you do have to adhere to in order to stay in compliance with the brand, whether it's cleanliness, food safety, et cetera, et cetera. So you are bound by certain things of that nature. But I think that's kind of, if there are any more specific questions I can answer.
But that's something I think that people want to think about, right? If you're thinking about a franchise, think about the ability to pass that on to the next generation. What is the ability built into their structure that enables you to actually use that to create wealth? Many of us wouldn't necessarily think of that. I want to now get to Peggy, because we have talked a lot about access to capital and challenges with accumulating capital, the wealth gap and all of this. And again, what has happened with Golden Seeds has really uncovered a correlation that makes sense, seems like it's intuitive. And we're very excited about the partnership we've created to now take that which is seeming to work for women through a gender lens and now translate that into people of color, to the Black community especially. And if you can talk a little bit about why angel investing is so important, despite the focus on VC capital, but why is angel investing so important, and what do you believe is the opportunity for the Black community when it comes to angel investing and access to capital for businesses?
Okay, thank you. It's just been such an informative panel on so many fronts. So the correlation that Jill is responding to is that, as I mentioned, when we started Golden Seeds, there really were no women investors. That was said to be about 3%, but we think we found all 10 of them in the United States and got them to join us, and most of them were in Boston at the time. And I'm kind of not joking. So we didn't have any women investors, and as I mentioned, the first meeting was 3 women. I was one of them. And we studied, we read all the books that were available and things like that, but we were pretty much faking it because we, by the second meeting, met a company that we thought we would try to invest in. We had to negotiate a term sheet. We came from financial background, so we didn't feel we were comfortable taking risk, doing deals, but every market has its own practices. So we had to learn. We had to learn everything. A convertible note in this market has a completely different meaning than what we had seen on Wall Street. So we had to act confident while we were learning, but what we also did was we created 4 courses as we learned. Everything we learned, we started teaching because there were no women angel investors. Basically, there weren't any. It wasn't about our going to another group and saying, hey, our group, join us. We had to go just find women and turn them into angel investors. And as I mentioned, I had never heard of it. I worked on Wall Street, and what we learned was all of the men around us were doing deals all the time, investing in companies, showing each other deals. Nobody ever showed us a deal. We didn't even know it was happening. Never heard of it. And I think that's where people of color are. We've never heard of it, really. In the same way, and honestly, I wish we had started this initiative years ago, but we're here today. So we created classes because the only way we could do it was to teach people the risk of this kind of investing, teach people how to do it to the best of our knowledge. The other thing I'll say about the angel market, though, is it was an all-male market, essentially, when we came into it. But the angel market is largely, the men are largely entrepreneurs. and they tend to be local groups that are really about investing in New Jersey, or New York Angels wants to invest. And a lot of angels traditionally are trying to grow their local economies, and they're entrepreneurs themselves. So we found that these were very open-minded people. Those men didn't know why they weren't investing in any women, and we're going to start having them understand, realizing that they're not investing in people of color. And I think we can see the same process, because once they realized it, they wanted to help. And our membership has always been about 20% men. We had men by the second meeting, because we can't do it without their capital. Yeah. And their contacts and their knowledge. So we've always been inclusive, because it's diversity that outperforms. So we knew we had to be diverse. So we've always included men. But the angel market, as I mentioned, is very open to opportunity. And I think if we start activating this, you'll find that they're quite open to it. One point I wanted to touch on when you were talking about measuring some things, at the first Black Angel event I attended with Jill, there was a young woman who was talking about the GDP of hip hop. And I believe she had a number that it was represented maybe 8 or 10, I forget the exact number. It was a pretty large number in terms of the power of hip hop and its influence on fashion, on music, entertainment, and I'd never heard it quantified as a percentage of GDP in that way. And it made, excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough, but it made total sense to me when she quantified it that way. Investors listen to that. And the angel market is very open, because we back completely out of the box things. That's what the angel market is. Why is the angel market so important? The venture capital market is, in my mind, an unbelievably broken system. I don't even think anymore about fixing that. You know, it's so bizarre. It is so broken that I could go on, and I'm not going to bother. The angel market every year funds about 40 to 60,000 companies a year. The venture capital market funds maybe 4,000 to 6,000 companies a year. So the angel capital starts companies. That's really where all these companies begin. Today, 5 companies, the 5 largest companies by market cap, Apple, Microsoft, all of them, you know that they had venture capital, but they all had an angel investor. All of them. Bill Gates was probably his father, but they had angel money. So if you don't get angel, you'll never get venture. And you don't have to get venture to be successful. And if people, like all of us, start activating as investors and investing in each other, we don't need the venture. And that's an institutional problem. That's $131 billion last year, where 86% went to all male teams and virtually nothing to people of color. You know, I don't even know how to fix it. But this angel market is so powerful. And what it represents is we're mimicking what white men have always done. They join angel groups when they own a business, because that's how they learn. When you're listening to other entrepreneurs pitching, they sit around and they act like they know everything. But they're learning, right? You're going, and maybe you're saying, oh my God, look at the technology that's coming. My business is going to be disrupted. You know, I'm going to be out of business. If these technology guys could start coming at me, I better invest in one of these. Maybe it's time to get out. Maybe you think you have a board of directors that's a problem. Well, you start listening about their stories, you start going, oh, my board's not that bad. They invest in each other. And that's what we as women said, we're going to create that. All of our members now are completely empowered as investors because of the training. I went to a Christmas party this year. I hadn't even crossed the threshold. And one of our members ran up to me. She didn't say hello or anything. She said, do you have pro rata rights on a convertible note when it converts? And I said, really? You know, like, no hello, no Merry Christmas. So, when we started 15 years ago, my partners and I, we would just sit there and be like, what's a convertible note again in this context? You know, what's a cap? all of our investors are extremely knowledgeable, and knowledge is power. So the angel market is not for everybody, but if you want to create a high growth company, it's the market where it really gets started, and it can bring a lot of capital. We have a drug for Alzheimer's that we've backed. We've never brought VC capital in yet, but we've brought 40 million of angel capital and 40 million of government grants. It's actually unbelievable that this is the kind of thing, because we don't, we just have to go find the money. We're always looking for money in alternative sources because the venture, maybe we get it, we over-index on it. So it's a very, very powerful market. You're all invited. If you want to come see one of our meetings, that's the other thing is, I still said, have you been invited? So you're all invited to a Golden Seeds meeting if you want to come see it. And we need to get more of you in the room to understand the process. So I think those are the points you wanted me to cover.
Yes, thanks. Damien.
You touched on something that I think permeates everything that we're talking about today, that I think, and I'm generalizing here, and I am of you, so please take this with love. Our community, one of the challenges I think we have, that even if you get all the knowledge up here today, is our ability to be vulnerable and to say, I don't know. And to go to somebody else and say, sister, brother, do you know what a convertible note is?
We'll tell you.
Do you know what this is? To get help, to go to a financial advisor. And I know one of the things you mentioned was trust being, an issue, but like you said it, these boys out there, I'm in Silicon Valley. I go to the houses they live in. I'm at the bars with them, and I overhear, I'll tell you, I belong to this little like social club where it's like membership only, you gotta pay a fee. And part of the reason I'm in it is because somebody looked around and was like, damn, we all look the same. Like we need to be more intentional, right? So fine, but
So they went out and got you.
They went out and got me and a few other folks. So now it's not just me, but when I'm in there, it's all founders talking to each other and making deals, and that's how you get in early. I had dinner with somebody the other night who invested in Uber when Uber was valued at $4 million. And they put in $75,000 when it was $4 million. And the way they got that was through their homies. So we may not all have homies who have that kind of access, but start being vulnerable and asking people about this stuff. We have to be vulnerable in order to learn, and we got to help each other. So I'm glad you touched on that.
And we need you because, for example, I'm on one of my investments is an advanced surgical adhesive. And they made a presentation. Stephanie was at the meeting. And Stephanie raised her hand and asked if this surgical adhesive worked on keloid scarring. Now, I'd heard the word, and it turns out that we had a doctor who'd run clinical trials on it, and it had superior performance. I'm an investor. I'm immediately thinking, this adhesive could be, our marketing could possibly be directed towards dermatologists who deal with that issue or surgeons. It's the knowledge. You're going to spot different opportunities, different ways to market, different. And the woman I was talking about who talked about the GDP of hip hop, her business case was that she said that Michael Kors bought Versace because Michael Kors, the brand, wasn't able to get close to hip hop. They had to buy Versace. We are investors, and this angel market will listen to this. We want to spot those kinds of opportunities and the businesses that can maybe capitalize on that. So this is a two-way street. We can all work together in the same way that the female brain was not being funded. People were not funding healthcare the way Golden Seeds does because that's the degrees that women are getting. These male investors don't really back the disease funding, the kinds of things that we back. We're backing a different vision of the future. We can all do it together.
And that's why, this conversation is so important, and it's why we launched the campaign called The Making of Black Angels, because it is that, look, most of us don't know, whether or not you even raise your hand if you know what it is, most of us are still not participating on that level. And so if we do this as a group, if we aren't just trying to go on our own to a meeting where maybe we're welcome or maybe we're not, but go together. And now we start inviting each other. And now I know about it and I say, hey, why don't you come to a meeting with me? So now that room starts to look a little bit different because everyone has invited one more person who's there. And as we start having these conversations around the dinner table, then our kids start thinking about it, and then their kids. And they're now talking in their college dorm rooms about, hey, I saw this business, I invested, and my parents invested in that company. It's a whole different conversation.
Yep.
Reggie.
Yeah, he started the word vulnerability. And what I find is that it's trust issue, right? So we see each other out socially, we look great, right? We say we look very shiny, right? And so a lot of times, if I have black clients, the first thing they say is they're embarrassed because they're saying, well, I always say this, look, I say, one, everything we discuss is confidential, and two is, if you're here meeting with me, you've made a decision to change your life, right? You can't say what I could have done, what I should have done. We're saying today you're making an effort to change your life, right? And so, we're a consumer generation, right? We consume a lot. And look, you worked hard, you get an education, and we like nice stuff, right? But it comes to a point where we have enough nice stuff, right? So enough of I don't judge women who have budgets that can sort of pay a mortgage or women who have designer handbag budgets, but I'm saying, okay, we have enough of that stuff saying, okay, how can we make a difference to go forward, right? So people saying, well, I'm not saving enough money. I've got bad credit. So once you sort of say there's no shame, we've all made mistakes, we can fix the credit, we don't have a nest egg, we can save that. Let's get the foundations right? Let's get we're underinsured, let's fix that. Once we fix that, then let's add other things in the portfolio to grow wealth, right? So I, as a conservative financial advisor, I'm not going to say everyone should be doing angel investing, but let's get your foundation right, and then let's get you an angel in training, and then we add that into your asset class, right? But it's a very exciting topic, and a lot of our clients who are accredited investors, and maybe Peggy can sort of define what Golden Seed is as a accredited investor. Correct me if I'm wrong. If you're single, if you make $200,000, if you're married or a partner, $300,000. Is that what you define it as? Then you're qualified as what we call angel investor. You're an accredited investor. Okay.
Or excuse me, $1 million in net worth, excluding your home.
Right. And it was very interesting, again, I point back to Stephanie's story, that she had been making good money all those years, that no one had ever invited her to an angel investor group or anything like that. When we started talking about this initiative and this kind of crazy idea and this brainstorming that I had been doing, Stephanie was one of the first people that said, you know what, I think you're onto something, because I had never been approached. No one had ever invited me. All this time I could have been investing and even maybe growing money at a even faster rate. Stephanie has now since joined Golden Seeds. Can
we give you a round of applause, Stephanie?
Yeah. But it is, it's that awareness. Who mentioned it? The people around you. Denisha said this. The people around you. At that social capital. We don't leverage the social capital nearly enough in sharing information, ways that we're getting richer for those people who are, mistakes that we're making, etc., so that we're sharing information that's elevating us in general as a community. You all have cards on your chair. If you have a question, write the card down, write your question down on the card, and we'll come around and collect it. We want to get some questions in here. I want to ask Tawana, what are some of the strategies that you have seen in the work that you're doing, the speaking that you're doing around the country? Are there some strategies that you are seeing that are working to address some of these issues?
A couple of things that I would say that I think follow along the lines of the conversations that we've had just here in the last section. One is being able to not only see networking and social capital building happening amongst us, but as we have, whether it is investors, and we have a few who are a part of our partnership, one is our landlord, who have taken on the responsibility to say, you know what, I look around my network and it doesn't look too diverse. They are people who look like me, and I can do something about that. I can invite them to social places, and I can also invite Black-owned business owners to those places and intentionally catalyze opportunity. And so our landlord started this, and he now has 6 of his other partners who are doing the same work of saying we're going to come together and not just to socialize, but everybody's going to leave with the investor, every white business owner who has an opportunity to do a deal with another business owner is going to lead that way. And we're going to do these in the same places where we hang out all the time, only we're going to do them in networks and social places that are more racially diverse than they would be normally. And I think that how do we make our building a hub for that type of work? So I think more to the table. I also think that some of the work that we're doing, you mentioned earlier, our work around procurement and supplier diversity, that is not new work. What is new is our ability to be able to link that to place-based change. And so we work with large corporations to be able to examine not just how much spend is happening with businesses that are owned by people of color, but to what end? Do you understand how that spend is resulting in wealth building or not? Is it equipping those businesses that you're spending dollars with to hire people at livable wages with benefits, create good jobs, not just jobs, or not? And if not, then how those companies can change those practices. And yes, we are a city that has Target and Best Buy and Land O'Lakes and Cargill and many others who have their headquarters in our city, and we want those dollars being spent in our city with businesses that are owned by people of color. But we want to be able to measure that. What gets measured gets done. And so equipping those large employers with the ability to spend those dollars, to measure the impact of those dollars, and then say, if we're not able to spend them, let's break down what it takes to do that. And Reggie and I had a brief conversation about the difference between a business like the woman who created the applesauce business he mentioned earlier, as opposed to some smaller cooperative businesses, but both have the opportunity to have impact on local economies. So our ability to help large corporations understand their spending power, their investment power, their mentoring power, their loan and underwriting power, that they can have real influence on our communities and the ability to build wealth through Black businesses.
Thank you. So let's get to a couple of questions here, and this is for Damien, Stephanie, or others. And I'm at the age where now the glasses thing, I have to move it kind of back and forth and try to see. There are Black professionals making money, good money. What advice for companies, communities, to educate them on why investment? On investment. So you're making good money. Why should you invest?
Why should they invest? Two main lessons that there are 3 lessons from my parents that I fell on as I was going through. And one was power of education. The second was the power of freedom, because my grandfather was a sharecropper and he actually left the land in debt because my mother had gone ahead to Boston and gotten a home for them to move to. And then the third one was the power of saving, where my father had worked and saved enough to build his home when he was relatively young. And when you're working in a corporate environment and you're making $100,000, $200,000, that is very good money. And I think that the key to saving that money is imagining a life beyond where you are right now. And when I was working, I always felt that there was a higher purpose for my life. There was another place that I was going to be, and that I would need money in order to do that. And that gave me the motivation to save at the time that I did. And I'm very grateful that I had that job for as long as I did, that I learned the skills that I learned in banking and finance while I was working there. But when you're working and you're making that type of money, just start out with your 401k. And I'm not a financial advisor. I defer to Reggie on the things to do. I will simply say what I did was to start immediately. I signed up on my 401k. My father gave me the best advice when I went to him and I said, I think I'm only going to be working there for 5 years. I wanted to be a teacher. And I thought I was going to leave after 5 years and go teach. And he's like, well, just invest for 5 years and then at least you'll have it to take with you. It was the best advice I was ever given. I sat down with an insurance agent at Northwestern at the time who talked to me about disability insurance, and then also making sure that when my son was born that there was life insurance in place in case something had happened to me. So you definitely want to get your ducks in a row, but imagine a life where you may not want to work or where you may not be able to work. And how do you use that capital in order to create a nest egg for yourself and ultimately to create free cash flow? And I think that that is the more interesting part of the equation, because so much of saving and investing is about getting to that number that you then spend down over your retirement or quote-unquote golden years. And I think that the more interesting question is, how much cash flow do I need to live on a daily, monthly, annual basis? And what assets can I put into place that will generate that cash flow? And when you are generating enough cash flow to cover your expenses, you are financially free. And that was one of the most powerful lessons that I learned in the course of this process. So think about that number, the cash flow number, and how you can invest assets to get you there. And then you really are in a position to start the other aspect of your life, which is whatever it is that you want to do. Maybe you are doing what you want to do, but if you are not, you can get about the business of doing it because you have the cash flow to cover your living expenses and make the choices that are important to you.
Just real quick, because I know
Yes.
we'll move on, but
We have lots of questions.
3 quick anecdotes. Number one is, I remember being in business school in a predominantly white classroom, and part of this class that we took about our life development it gave us access to a model, literally, on our laptops, where we had to put in all kinds of variables, like how many relatives did we think we'd have to support, were our kids going to go to private school, etc. And it literally mapped out the next 90 years and worked backwards and said, here's how much you need to make each year, and here's how much you need to save each year. That is a very sobering reality, and many of us, just people, right, don't do that. So I couldn't agree with you more. 2 reasons why I think we need to invest and why we should be educating. Number one, I remember my financial advisor saying, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to work with me? And I said, because I am afraid to be broke. I'm afraid to have all this money come through my hands with the sacrifices that my ancestors and my mother made, and to end up one day broke. The other thing, these companies, I love my company, don't get me wrong, but companies are beholden to the markets. The markets ebb and flow. You've seen mad layoffs happen at big companies. So the other reason you invest is, no matter how great of a job you have and no matter how much money you have, whether it's because you want to bounce on your own or because one day you walk into work and somebody tells you you have to bounce and you don't have a choice, you got to plan for that. Bottom line, you have to plan for that. So I would say that's it. And we shouldn't be relying on companies to educate us. Back to vulnerability, we should be seeking the information on our own. And when you find out what a stock buyback plan is at your company, you tell other people about it, especially the folks in our community.
Great. All right, so
Agreed.
So we have a number of questions, so I want to try to get to as many of them as possible, so if we can be brief in our answers. Reggie, there's a lot of interest in this wealth management thing, right? Just speak a little bit about the role of estate planning, wills, trust, power of attorney, why do you need to do all this stuff, and what are the things that someone should look for in selecting a wealth advisor, a financial planner?
I'm going to be very quick. The industry is moving to comprehensive financial planning, right? So you have to be mindful of, a lot of times people say, well, there's no fee. Well, you go to a doctor, you pay a fee. You go to an attorney, you pay a fee. So the concept of you coming to see a financial professional, you're not paying a fee. If you're not paying a fee, they're going to get the money through, something, because obviously
through other fees.
Through other fees, right? So there's 6 areas of building wealth that we look at. One is financial position, right? We give you a checklist. Do you know on a monthly basis what your bills are, right? It's a cash flow, right? I make X amount of money, X amount of my bills. What do I have left over at the end of the month, right? It's basically cash flow, current position. Second thing is protection planning, right? So what insurances do you have in place? Most people say, well, I have this at work. What you have at work is temporary. If you got laid off, you don't have it. So you need permanent insurance, right? Then it's investment planning. And then it's tax planning because you want to be efficient. And then retirement planning, what does that look like? And then estate planning, right? So estate planning is a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare proxy. But to Stephanie's point, is goal setting, right? So even if I meet with a 30-year-old, I say, what does retirement look like? Because if you're young and you know, money doubles X 7, 8, 9 years. So we like to really work also with very young clients because you have a 28-year-old, I mean, really quickly, makes about $200,000, lives a modest lifestyle. In 20 years, he can retire at 41. You retire at 60 at $20 million, right? He doesn't make over $1 million. It's not how much you make, it's how much you keep in living a modest lifestyle. And I think, Stephanie, we should do a roadshow because like you've done everything right. It was actually amazing.
We'll have to do a roadshow because she's done everything right. I've done so much wrong.
I can help you, Jill. Have a meeting.
So we have several questions here about funding. We don't have time to go into all of these, but one of the questions is, you know, VC funding is still only 2% of minority, is still only funding 2% of minority ventures. How do we find tech funding that is so readily available to others? And Peggy, if you can talk about this again really briefly, but why it is an imperative for us to better understand angel investing, which even helps to educate us for friends and family type investing. Why should this really be our focus?
It really should be because I worked on Wall Street, but I have never understood business in the way that I have learned in the last 15 years. Because the angel market is where a certain type of high growth company is created. And the angel market is the market where the original bones of the company are established, how the board is going to be formed, who has control, all of these dynamics are set in this market. And so, you know, I was talking on the train today, for example, a few years ago, I was really fascinated to read about IAC, Barry Diller, Don Malone, and they're always at each other's throats. And I realized in an article I read in the Wall Street Journal that Barry Diller only owns like 3% of IAC. John Malone really has the majority interest, but all voting control was given to Barry Diller. Somewhere early in that company, I don't know the history, some decision was made to give control to this person, even though this person had the money. So our market is the market that really deals with the creation of the early structures of the companies. So you really learn how corporations come to be, and you start learning. So I was talking about Tesla. You know, when you start seeing something like Tesla and a CEO making kind of strange public statements, and the board not taking action, where normally you would expect the board maybe to take action. So I looked at the board, and it's 2 VCs, his brother, and a friend, because that was set up in this world before it went public, so nobody's going to touch them. So this market is extremely important, and understanding how it works will honestly teaches you everything about business, and that's why I'm saying that's why those guys are in those rooms, because it's actually how they're learning the ropes. I would say, you know, they would probably laugh at me, but they'll be less likely to ask questions of each other. We have a lot of men from other angel groups take our classes, often with their children and things like that, because we're a learning organization. But that is how you learn. I have just learned so much about business. And the other thing is that when 15 years ago, if a startup entrepreneur had come to me, there was not one sensible, relevant thing I could have told them. I was completely clueless. I would not have known where they would get capital. I wouldn't have known how you do a pitch. We all need to be in these rooms so that we can help these entrepreneurs understand what capital is available to them, or how their company has to look and how they have to pitch it. You can't coach them if you haven't been in our rooms, and we couldn't coach them. As I said, you know, I had nothing valuable I could have done 15 years ago. Today, you know, I can look at thousands of decks, blah, blah, blah. It's an unbelievably important market. It needs to be protected. It is the backbone. And then this VC thing, but what we have done is we have used the angel market to keep funding our companies. So we get more VC than the statistics would say, because once we were perceived as knowing what we were doing, then having us as a lead investor actually started getting more capital. And once you guys join our groups and other angel groups, and once you just know the ropes, people are going to be open to great opportunities. That's one thing about the angel market. People listen. They're used to hearing every kind of idea you can imagine. I have seen unbelievably crazy stuff, things you just can't, and things we've invested in, you can't even believe we did it. So we're used to that. This market's used to that idea generation, but you have to learn the lingo, and this is where you learn it. And it will make you better in your own businesses. And remember, most angel groups are actually entrepreneurs who are in there. We had to do it with women out of corporate, women out of banking, because we really there weren't as many successful women entrepreneurs back then.
All right, so I have to start wrapping up, and you would not believe the number of cards that I have here and questions. This is very exciting, though. I want everyone to write down makingblackangels.com. makingblackangels.com. And I'll come back to that in a second. So there's a question here about, equity crowdfunding that exists. It's there. It is another option. It's something that is, for people who are having difficulty maybe getting other sources of capital. What funding sources do you suggest for solo entrepreneurs? Your own money, your own savings, friends and family money. What is the best online source to get information about funding opportunities? There are lots of them out there. That, again, will come back to makingblackangels.com. How do you get all of the panelists' emails and information and opportunities to get more information about angel investing? Again, we're going to come back to makingblackangels.com. There were some questions here about writing a business plan and starting a business. What do you think about network marketing, direct sales, things like that? Those are certainly opportunities. The whole thing is to talk to other people who are doing it. Talk to other people who are in these things doing it. The benefit of a tight business plan, I don't know if anyone has anything to add here, but, a business plan mostly helps you figure out what the path is for the business to be profitable. You're in business to be profitable. You're in business to hopefully even extract wealth from that business. How do you do that? That's what you want a business plan to help you figure out. Would any of the panelists undertake a female as an apprentice to learn and become an investor or first-time business student? Again, makingblackangels.com. This is an inclusive community to get everybody involved in this in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Even if you never go on to actually write a check yourself, get better informed so that you can better guide people that are in the community. And sometimes it feels like we're kind of the blind leading the blind, and that we're trying to tell other people what they should do, and we don't ourselves know what we should do. So this is about educating ourselves, not feeling any shame, feeling like we're all in this together, and together we're going to go to the next level. There's a question here about what advice would you give to a young business owner on how to keep a constant cycle of income within the Black community? How would I impact change on my community? Anyone want to have a comment on that? Stephanie? Not on that?
I just think coaching, mentoring, other entrepreneurs. Bringing your entrepreneurs love to talk to other entrepreneurs. That is the advice they most like to receive, because they're talking to somebody who's walked in their footsteps. You have so many business people in this room. You all know how incredibly lonely it is. You can't confide in your employees, your worries, your stress. You have to always look like everything's under control, keep it together. You have all these employees depending on you. So any mentoring, even mentoring, another entrepreneur is huge. You know, because you know all the problems that they're going through. And making yourself available just to one, as a coach or a mentor, even just on a leadership basis, is huge. The investing piece may be down the road, but there are so many other, they need so much.
Yeah.
I would also stress the need to take an intersectional approach. We have to get past the bars of talk to me about business over here and social over there and faith and church over there and bring those barriers down. That does not happen in other communities. It is all about business and moving up the ladder, and so the more that we can do that in multiple places. I'm a former Links chapter president, and that when I was president, bringing organizations and business to the table so that we were not only talking about social and keeping that separate from business was key for us. So I would say push those walls down and help educate people who might tell you, oh no, I don't want to hear about your business today. Help them understand why your business helps their community.
And you know, the best way to help others is to do what? Help yourself first, right? So we have just 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure I get to makingblackangels.com to explain. I would like for each of you to just give that one-liner on, you know, what is the thing you want to leave the audience with about building wealth. Peggy, let's start with you and come back this way.
I just want to thank you for having me here and letting me learn so much. And I hope that you'll just look at the angel market a little bit and encourage entrepreneurs to come to us and bring us the great ideas. We'll listen, and really looking forward to hearing some wonderful companies and building them out.
Sure, sell on eBay, but more important, it's a mindset. It's a mindset. Like everything else, it's a mindset. And so open your minds and open the minds of the young folks who aren't as set in their ways right now and bring up that crew. All right? It's a mindset.
Yeah, I would say make sure you have your financial house in order. And as you're doing that, really focus on educating yourself about wealth. You know, there's a ton of books. I can email you some of the books that I read as I was going through my journey, if anyone's interested. But I think that if you start the process of educating yourself, go to a meetup in your area about a topic that you don't know a lot about. There are tons of real estate investing groups, angel investing groups in the DC area. Just go to one. Be open to learning as you're going through this journey, and I think it can make a tremendous difference.
I think for me, the top line, especially after sitting here, is just really grasping the concept of wealth begets further wealth. And if we could just get to the point of equipping our next generation to be able to be interested and handle wealth and not confusing income and lifestyle with wealth.
Show up. You've already done that today. Continue to show up and speak the amazing knowledge that you have as entrepreneurs in as many places as possible and take advantage of them in your communities.
I would say take action. According to LIMRA, which is the Insurance Association, 43% of Americans are not protecting their loved ones. Let's use the power of insurance to create wealth and protect ourselves.
Thank you. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? All of that at one time. That was amazing. So, you know, I've always been a big believer of you can hear all these things, and the congressman knows, and I've talked to his team, and Laverne, thank you so much for everything, that we get all this great energy, and everyone's all excited. And then we leave, and who knows what happens, and does anyone take action and do anything? And the whole point of all of this and all these folks spending their time to come here is for us to do better and to do something differently and for us to take action. So here are, as I mentioned, you know, we started this campaign called The Making of Black Angels. And as we've been out talking to people, we've just heard a lot of enthusiasm, excitement, and people wanting to know more. And it really was just today that it occurred to me that, you know, Jill, you guys are going and you're talking to a whole group of folks, and if they also want to know more, we need to be proactive in giving people more and having a platform to give people more. So this morning on the train down here, I actually registered the domain name makingblackangels.com.
Yeah.
Right? I registered this morning, so there's nothing there yet. Nothing there yet.
It's on the other website.
1 week from today, I promise to and commit to having on that platform the contact information. I think I can speak for everyone. Everyone's okay with that? Contact information for all the folks up here on that site. A place to sign up where we can get more information. We are right now contemplating a multi-city tour to take Making Black Angels to different locations to have first just an awareness, what is angel investing, and have that conversation. And then to have, say a couple months later, a training. So it's an introduction to angel investing so that you can learn and grow. I mean, that's what this is about. It would, I think, would have been just too much of a teaser for us to stand here talking about all this stuff, but then not be prepared to help you do anything to act on it. And we all know that still in many of our communities, even if there are angel groups, they may not be so warm and welcoming to people who are not those already part of those groups. So we want to be proactive in helping you to get to where you want to go. So there are 3 things that we would like for you to do. One is to, next week at this time, go on makingblackangels.com and sign up. We would like for you to look at the different ways that we have on there about getting more education about angel investing, and go back and do some research on angel investing so you just learn and understand what it is. The third thing is, some of you raised your hands about having a wealth advisor. We would like everyone to have a conversation with a wealth advisor. You have Reggie, who's here, happy to talk to anyone. If you have your own, someone in your community, whatever it is, and Reggie will even talk to you and then tell you to, help you pick one who's not him, if that's what it takes. But we want everyone to talk with a wealth advisor to just understand where you are, right? That's not too hard. We didn't say you had to do anything, buy anything, but talk with a wealth advisor, because this gets us on a different path to getting professional assistance with building and creating wealth, and that's what we want to do. Thank you, Congressman, for having me again. I love doing this. This is, it's just a passion with this new focus on elevating the conversation, and I thank you for, allowing us to have this conversation on your watch. So thank you. To make final comments, there's one thing that got asked, and you don't necessarily have to answer this, but there was a question about policy initiatives. Are there policy initiatives that are being considered that can encourage this type of activity and behavior that we're discussing? So if there are any ideas you have on that, feel free to share. But there are a few of us who are on this panel who are actively thinking about some policy initiatives that we may be prepared to put forth to you and get your guidance in how to get those through. So again, thank you.
Thank you. Let's first thank our moderator, Jill Johnson. We're as delighted and happy to have you come back every year as you are to be here, because you really help facilitate the conversation in a manner which is very productive. Let me just say, I'd also like to thank once again an incredible panel of people this year. Just to continue to move this discussion forward. And when I arrived in Congress, I was a member of the Small Business Committee in the House of Representatives. I've subsequently moved on to transportation infrastructure, but I felt in being consistent and having a commitment to this topic that I continue to move this discussion forward in terms of our community and entrepreneurship and business, because it is the epitome of what America stands for, and we need to be a part of that entire movement. So it's really an honor and privilege for me to use the bully pulpit that I have in order to stimulate these conversations. And I think one thing that was very interesting, I stand on the shoulders of my uncle William Payne, who is here, and my father. And I think it's interesting, that whole notion of people being worried about generational wealth and standing on, and feeling guilty. I never really had that problem. I tell you, you're Donald Payne Jr. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. No problem with it. But it is an issue. It is an issue that you bring out. There's just so many ways that these issues can be discussed and move forward. And so I just feel it's my obligation to put such knowledgeable people before you, and then it's up to you to determine what you want to do with that information. We're all great starters, like Jill said. We come down and we're motivated. We're going to go and we're going to do it all. It's our follow-through that is lacking, and we need to continue to be consistent on moving the ball forward. So I just want to thank everyone once again for being here and kind of making me look good. This room is, I was a little worried in the beginning, but it filled up. We normally only use half the room, so it looks good, but this was really great. This is such an important topic. This is about people's lives, families, generational wealth, and being able to really appreciate and move forward. What am I trying to say? Just us being part of the American dream and being able to utilize the tools in the background of people to move our community forward. So I'm just delighted to once again have this opportunity to bring a panel such as this before you. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the ALC weekend. Let me first, I don't do this alone. Let me see, I have a really great team, and they're here, starting with my Chief of Staff, Laverne Alexander. Stand up. Leave home without her. And also, where's Patrick Wright and Jamil Peters and Shannon Casey, my scheduler, keeps me headed in the right direction. And I see a lot of some of my former staff here as well. Where's Miss Jones? Okay. What's your name? What's your name? Worthington. Erica. She was with me for about 4 years, and I finally remembered her name. Say, go get the young one. Tell the young one to come in. No, but Erica Northington, who is with McDonald's now, and just has did a wonderful job for me, and has moved on to real money. The government, you don't make it. So just great to see them all here. And also my Uncle William, who I mentioned, who was the owner of this business. And he is the author of the racial profiling bill in the state of New Jersey. Yes. And also, if you know of the Amistad legislation, he is the author of that as well. And so. So thank you very much, and hope to see you again next year. Thank you.